This is probably the most famous painting in the museum's collection. The museum bought it in 1998 after a huge fundraising campaign. Lots of local people donated money to ensure that it could stay in public hands and be enjoyed by everyone. What was it about the painting that people thought was worth saving? And is it possible to see a painting that is so well known, that you have seen so many times both in the art gallery and reproduced in books and on postcards? Is it possible to see it with fresh eyes? Before I say anything else, let's take a few moments to look at it without me talking. What details did you notice? Did you spot the 4 Native Americans on horseback, 3 clutching lances, the 4th a rifle? And what about the tent encampment or teepee ring in the far distance? And did you notice the dried bones of an animal and the solitary tree in the foreground? What do these details mean? All these details are deliberate. They are indicators of how Thomas Moran wants us to see this landscape. Moran first came to this area, the Green River region of Wyoming in the western United States, as part of Ferdinand Hayden's Geological Survey of the Territories in 1871. Expeditions like Hayden's survey were about plotting routes, mapping territory so the terrain could be put to productive and profitable use, for example mining the rich minerals that lay underground. Moran's role on the expedition was to create a pictorial representation of the physical features of the landscape. He took this task very seriously, learning from the geologists, botanists and other scientists on the expedition. He said, "I have to have knowledge. I must know geology. I must know the rocks and the trees and the atmosphere and the mountain torrents and the birds that fly in the blue ether above me." This comes across in the close attention he paid to the specific characteristics of the landscape, the colour and texture of the rocks, the species of plant and animal that were common to the area. He brings all these different elements, trees, rocks, birds, water, together in a kind of unity, a shared virtual space. In pictures, the natural world can be thought out, composed, framed, given coherence. In reality, everything is a bit messier, tangled up. It can get especially messy when humans are involved. By the time Moran arrived in the town of Green River, which was the starting point for Hayden's expedition, it had around 2,000 residents. It had a schoolhouse, hotel, stores and a brewery. Famously, Moran decided to eliminate the town from his picture. The only signs of any human presence in his landscape are the 4 Native Americans. In fact, this apparent wilderness was permeated with human activity. Native Americans had lived in this part of Wyoming for thousands of years, and in the years leading up to Moran's visit, they had been joined by an increasing number of white settlers, innkeepers, traders, farmers, gold miners, construction crews, and railroad workers. Moran would have encountered this new, raw, disparate population during his stay in Green River, and he would have seen how the town itself and the railroad that had caused its rapid growth and the bridge that was being built across the river were radically altering the surrounding landscape, were becoming part of the landscape. But Moran chose to exclude the town and its inhabitants from his painting. I'll consider some of the reasons for that in a moment, but first I want to explore how Moran got to this point, how and why he ended up in Green River. Although the journey to Green River marked a crucial turning point in his career as an artist, it was only one of a series of important journeys in his life. Like so many people in the 19th century, Thomas and his family were caught up in the great waves of movement, of migration that pushed people from villages to towns and cities, and from one country to another. His father was an Irish weaver who had emigrated to Bolton sometime in the 1820s. In the 1841 census, he's listed as a weaver with two sons, Edward, born in 1829, and Thomas, born in 1837. One of the images we've included with this post is Salim Wafrel's amazing panoramic landscape, Bolton from Blinkhorn's Chimney. It was created sometime between 1843 and 1848. It gives a sense of what Bolton looked like when the Moran family were living there. Although it looks like the town is thriving with all the mills and rows of terraced housing, this was actually a difficult time in Bolton's history, especially for its legions of textile workers. Many mills were working at half-time or had closed entirely due to an economic depression, and there was a lot of unemployment. It was even harder for handloom weavers like Thomas's father. The adoption of the power loom by the Lancashire textile industry was slowly destroying the trade of handloom weaving. Because of these economic stresses, and enticed by the promise of better opportunities in the New World, Thomas's father decided to move his family to America. The Moran family emigrated to the United States in 1844 when Thomas was 7, eventually settling in Philadelphia. After a short apprenticeship in a wood engraving firm, Thomas began studying art with his elder brother, Edward. Together, they visited England in 1862. While Edward enrolled at the Royal Academy Schools as a student, Thomas went to the National Gallery to study the work of J.M.W. Turner. Seeing Turner's oil paints and watercolours at first hand was a real revelation. The vividness of Turner's colours, especially his use of red, yellow and blue, his evocative use of light and his stunning atmospheric effects, all this would have a huge influence on Moran's own approach to the art of landscape. On his return to the United States, Thomas supported himself by drawing magazine illustrations. An article on the wonders of the American West in Scribner's Monthly, which he illustrated, caught the attention of Ferdinand Hayden, who was about to set off on his survey of the Yellowstone region. He invited Moran to come along as expedition artist. From New York, where Thomas was living with his wife, the American printmaker Mary Nimmo Moran, to Green River, was a journey of 2,000 miles, and it wasn't even the ultimate destination. It was merely a stopping point before the more arduous journey into the Yellowstone territories. Nevertheless, the time Moran spent in Green River, though not long, proved to be a major turning point in his career. What he saw when he got off the train was something amazing, astounding. It was like no place he had ever seen before. The wide open desert landscape, the massive sandstone peaks, the dazzling displays of colour at sunset. It must have seemed like he was seeing a landscape painted by Turner. Or maybe it was that he was seeing the landscape through Turner's eyes, having absorbed so much of his work in the National Gallery. Sketching, looking with the aid of pencil, paint and paper, was Thomas's way of getting used to this alien landscape, a way of ordering, classifying what he was seeing. We've included the first sketch he made of the Green River area in the collection of images below, courtesy of the Gilcrease Museum in Tulsa. It depicts the towering form of Castle Rock, now called Tollgate Rock, rising up above the river. If you compare it to the Turner watercolour on the Upper Rhine, which we've also included in the collection of images, you get a sense of how much Moran had learned from Turner. And then if you compare the sketch to Bolton's painting, Nearing Camp, Evening on the Upper Colorado River, you can see that Moran has already set down on paper many of the details that he would later adapt and scale up for his finished oil painting. It's worth remembering that the work he was doing on Hayden's expedition was preliminary. Field sketches, notes, colour studies, The exploitation of these sketches was reserved for a later stage when he was back in his New York studio. Using these sketches and others he made on a subsequent trip in 1879, he produced around 40 oil and watercolour paintings of the Green River area during his career. He avoided duplicating himself by showing the scene from slightly different viewpoints and at different times of the day. Two constants remained, though. He always included Castle Rock and a group of Native Americans. The main audience for these pictures were people living in the great eastern cities of New York and Washington. Easterners viewing Green River from Moran's perspective saw a virgin, pristine area whose only inhabitants were wild American Indians. The American West had long been seen as a kind of violent and chaotic landscape. One of the reasons Moran was invited to join Hayden's survey was to produce pictures that would encourage people to settle in the Western Territories, which was much easier after the construction of the Union Pacific Railroad. Moran's paintings of the American West are beautiful, consumable, somewhat akin to real estate advertisements, or like the best tourism posters ever produced. They make you want to jump on a train and visit. Paradoxically, however, Moran seems to have had a very different purpose in mind when he was creating paintings like Nearing Camp. He wanted to preserve the landscape in its wilderness form, to stop it being ruined by too much inward expansion from the east. And that's why he chose to emphasize the immensity, the purity, the wilderness aspect of the landscape in his paintings, and leave out any signs of modern civilization, such as the town of Green River or the tracks and trains of the Union Pacific Railroad. His purpose wasn't really to represent the landscape as it was in his own time, by showing his audience what it looked like in the past, or his version of the past, when the only inhabitants were Native Americans. He was demonstrating what it could look like in the future, a pure, unspoiled wilderness. In some ways, he succeeded. His drawings and paintings of Yellowstone helped to inspire the national parks movement, but he wasn't able to stop the great tide of tourism that would swamp the Western Territories. If you visit the Green River region now, and even Yellowstone National Park, it's difficult to ignore the appearance of railway lines, hotels, car parks, viewing points and freeways. Knowing this is a reminder that nothing stays the same forever. Sudden shifts and smaller cumulative changes shape the present and the future appearance of a landscape. Nearing Camp was originally painted in 1879. However, when Thomas decided to bring the canvas to Britain, he repainted it and added the date 1882. That was the year he made his second return journey to Bolton. He had visited in 1862 as well. The painting was included in an exhibition of his work at Bromley's Art Gallery on Bradshaw Gate. The display included over 100 oil paintings, watercolours and prints. "We venture to affirm," wrote a reporter, "that admirers of landscape and other artworks of high order will experience a pleasant surprise on viewing the productions of this truly great artist." As this report suggests, Thomas was totally unknown in his hometown until this exhibition. It was the start of his work gaining wider recognition beyond the United States. Nearing Camp was sold to a private collector. It remained in the hands of the collector's family for decades. When the family decided to sell the painting, the museum launched a fundraising campaign to buy it. It's now on permanent display in the art gallery. We hope that you will be able to see it again soon.